My name is Olive, and this is the story of how I learned to speak English. It all began when my family moved to a new country. Everything felt different, and I was nervous because I didn't know how to speak English very well. At school, everyone around me spoke English, but I could only understand a few words. It made me feel scared and lonely because I couldn't talk to the other kids. My parents told me that learning English would help me make friends and feel more comfortable in our new home. They encouraged me to try my best, even if it was hard at first. I knew that learning a new language would take time, but I was determined to do it. On my first day at my new school, I met my teacher, Mrs. Parker. She was very kind and made me feel welcome. Mrs. Parker understood that I was just beginning to learn English, so she spoke slowly and used simple words to help me understand. I should make mistakes, she said, because we learn. I also met some new classmates who were friendly and patient with me. They helped me by showing me things around the school and teaching me new words. Even though it was difficult at first, I started to feel more confident each day. This was the beginning of my journey to learn English. It wasn't always easy, but with the support of my family, teacher, and friends, I knew I could do it. I was ready to work hard and learn this new language. As I continued my journey to learn English, I realized that one of the best ways to improve was to surround myself with the language as much as possible. My teacher, Mrs. Parker, called this immersion. She explained that the more I listened to and used English, the better I would get at understanding and speaking it. At home, I started watching cartoons in English. At first, I didn't understand everything, but I could pick out some words and phrases. I also began listening to English songs. The catchy tunes made it fun to learn new words, and soon I found myself singing along. Reading became another important part of my immersion. I borrowed simple books from the school library and tried to read a little bit each day. Sometimes I didn't know what all the words meant, but I would look at the pictures to help me guess. My parents also helped by reading bedtime stories to me in English. Mrs. Parker encouraged me to practice speaking English as often as I could. At first, I was shy and afraid of making mistakes, but she reminded me that practice was the key to getting better. So, I started speaking English at home with my parents, and even with my younger brother, who was also learning. I began to notice that the more I used English in my daily life, the easier it became. I understood more of what people were saying and could respond with simple sentences. Immersing myself in the language every day made a big difference. It helped me build the confidence I needed to keep going. One of the hardest parts of learning English was getting over my fear of speaking. I was always worried that I might say something wrong or that people would laugh at me. But Mrs. Parker, my teacher, helped me understand that making mistakes is just a part of learning. She told our class that it's okay to make mistakes because each mistake is a chance to learn something new. This made me feel a little better, but I was still nervous. To help us practice, Mrs. Parker organized fun activities where we could speak English without feeling too scared. One of the activities was partner talk. We paired up with another student and had short conversations in English. At first, I felt shy, but my partner was patient and kind. We talked about simple things like our favorite foods and colors. Each time we practiced, I felt a little more confident. Mrs. Parker also encouraged us to talk to ourselves in English. It sounded funny at first, but it actually helped. I would practice saying things like, "I am brushing my teeth," or "I am going to school," while I was doing them. This made it easier to think in English and get used to speaking the language. The more I practiced, the less scared I felt. I started to realize that most people were happy to help me, and no one laughed at my mistakes. In fact, they often praised me for trying. Slowly, I began to speak English more and more, both in class and outside of school. Speaking without fear was a big step for me. It helped me become more confident, and I started to enjoy using English to talk to others. As I continued to learn English, I realized that knowing more words would help me understand and communicate better. Mrs. Parker had many fun ways to help us learn new vocabulary. She believed that learning should be enjoyable, so she made sure we had plenty of games and activities to play while we learned. One of my favorite games was called Word Bingo. Mrs. Parker would give us bingo cards with different English words on them. She would then say a word out loud, and we had to find it on our cards. If we found the word, we got to mark it off. The first person to mark off a whole row would shout bingo and win a small prize. This game helped me learn new words and remember them in a fun way. Another activity that helped was making flashcards. I would write new English words on one side of the card and draw a picture or write the meaning on the other side. My friends and I would quiz each other using these cards, and it made learning feel like a game. The pictures helped me remember the words more easily. Mrs. Parker also encouraged us to label things around our homes with English words. I put sticky notes on items like the door, the table, and the fridge, with their English names written on them. Every time I saw the notes, I would say the word out loud. This helped me learn the words faster because I was seeing and saying them every day. By turning vocabulary learning into play, I was able to remember more words without feeling like I was studying. It made learning English fun and exciting, and I was always eager to learn more. Learning grammar was another important part of my journey to becoming fluent in English. At first, the rules seemed confusing, and I didn't know how to put sentences together correctly. But Mrs. Parker showed us that grammar didn't have to be hard or boring. She had fun ways to help us learn and practice grammar every day. One of the first things we learned was how to make simple sentences. Mrs. Parker taught us that a sentence needs a subject, who or what the sentence is about, and a verb, what the subject is doing. She used colorful pictures to help us understand. For example, she showed us a picture of a cat and said, "The cat is sleeping." We then practiced making our own sentences with pictures. To make grammar more fun, Mrs. Parker taught us songs and rhymes that included grammar rules. We sang songs about verbs, nouns, and even how to use is and are correctly. The songs made it easier to remember the rules because they were catchy and fun to sing along to. I would often find myself humming the tunes, even when I wasn't in class. Mrs. Parker also had us do simple writing exercises. We would write short sentences or even little stories using the grammar rules we had learned. She always encouraged us to be creative and not worry too much about making mistakes. If we did make a mistake, she would gently correct us and explain how to fix it. The more I practiced, the more comfortable I became with using grammar in my sentences. I learned that it was okay to make mistakes because each one helped me get better. Practicing grammar through songs, games, and writing made it easier for me to understand how to use English correctly. As I continued learning English, I discovered that stories were one of the most powerful tools for improving my language skills. Mrs. Parker often read stories to our class, and I loved listening to them. The stories were not only fun, but they also helped me learn new words and understand how sentences fit together. Mrs. Parker started by reading simple stories with lots of pictures. The pictures helped me understand what was happening, even if I didn't know all the words. As I listened, I tried to guess what the new words meant based on the pictures and the story. Afterward, Mrs. Parker would go over the story with us, explaining the new words and phrases. She encouraged us to read on our own as well. I started borrowing easy books from the school library. At first, I chose books with just a few words on each page. As I got better at reading, I started picking books with more words and fewer pictures. Each new book felt like a little adventure, and I was excited to see how much I could understand. But reading wasn't the only way stories helped me learn. Mrs. Parker also asked us to write our own short stories. She gave us simple prompts like, write about your favorite animal, or tell a story about a fun day at the park. Writing stories helped me practice using the new words and grammar rules I had learned. It was also a great way to express my thoughts and ideas in English. Sometimes, we would share our stories with the class. This was a little scary at first, but it was also exciting to hear what my classmates had written. Listening to their stories gave me new ideas and helped me see different ways to use English. Through reading and writing stories, I learned how to express myself better in English. It became easier to understand others and to share my own thoughts. Stories made learning English fun and meaningful. One of the most important things I learned on my journey to speaking English fluently was the importance of using the language in my daily life. Mrs. Parker always told us that the best way to get better at English was to practice it as much as possible, not just in class, but everywhere we went. At first, this was a little scary for me. I was afraid that I might say something wrong or that people wouldn't understand me, but I knew that practicing was the only way I would improve. So, I started by using English in small ways at home. I would ask my parents simple questions in English, like, "Can I have some water?" or "What time is dinner?" Even though we usually spoke in our native language, my parents were happy to help me practice. I also began using English when we went out, like when we went shopping or to a restaurant. I would read the labels on the food packages and try to understand what they said. At restaurants, I would practice ordering my food in English. The first few times, I was nervous, but I soon found that most people were patient and even smiled when I tried to speak English. In school, I made an effort to talk to my classmates in English during recess and lunch. We would play games and tell stories, and I would try to use the new words I had learned. The more I practiced, the easier it became, and soon, speaking English started to feel more natural. Using English in real-life situations helped me become more confident and fluent. It made the language feel less like something I was studying and more like a tool I could use to express myself. The more I used English, the better I got, and I started to enjoy speaking it more and more. One of the most helpful ways I improved my English was by having conversations with others. Mrs. Parker always encouraged us to talk to each other in English as much as possible. She explained that speaking with other people was one of the best ways to learn because it helps us practice using the language in real situations. At first, I felt shy and worried that I might make mistakes. But Mrs. Parker reminded us that it was okay to make mistakes because they help us learn. She set up activities in class where we could practice speaking in pairs or small groups. We would talk about simple topics, like our favorite foods or what we did over the weekend. These conversations helped me get used to speaking English, and I started to feel more comfortable. Outside of class, I also tried to have conversations in English whenever I could. When I was at the store, I would ask the cashier simple questions in English like, "How much does this cost?" Or, "Can I have a bag, please?" Even small conversations like these helped me practice my speaking skills. I also started talking to my classmates more. During lunch or recess, we would chat about different things, like our favorite TV shows or what we planned to do after school. These conversations were fun, and they helped me learn new words and phrases. The more I practiced speaking, the easier it became to find the right words and put them into sentences. I realized that conversations were a key part of learning a language. By talking to others, I could practice what I had learned in class and use English in a real and meaningful way. The more I talked, the better I got at understanding and speaking English, and it felt great to see how much I was improving. Learning English taught me that patience and persistence are very important. When I first started learning, I wanted to be able to speak fluently right away. But Mrs. Parker reminded me that learning a language takes time and effort. She encouraged us to be patient with ourselves and to keep trying, even when things felt difficult. I learned that it's okay to make mistakes. Every mistake is a chance to learn something new and improve. Mrs. Parker always told us that even native English speakers make mistakes sometimes. What's important is that we keep practicing and don't give up. Some days were harder than others. There were times when I felt frustrated because I couldn't understand something or couldn't find the right words to say. But Mrs. Parker and my classmates were always there to support me. They encouraged me to keep going and reminded me of how far I had already come. I also learned that everyone learns at their own pace. Some things were easy for me to learn, while others took more time and practice. Mrs. Parker taught us that it's okay to go at our own speed and to focus on improving a little bit every day. Through patience and persistence, I started to see progress. I could understand more of what people were saying, and I felt more confident speaking English. I learned that learning a language is a journey, and it's important to enjoy the process and celebrate small victories along the way. As I look back on my journey to learning English, I feel proud of how far I've come. It wasn't always easy, but with hard work and determination, I was able to achieve my goals. Learning a new language has opened up so many opportunities for me and has helped me connect with people from different cultures and backgrounds. One of the things I've learned is the importance of celebrating success, no matter how small. Each time I learned a new word, had a successful conversation, or understood something new in English, I celebrated my achievement. It made me feel proud of myself and motivated me to keep going. I'm grateful for the support I received from my family, my teacher, and my classmates. They believed in me and encouraged me every step of the way. Their encouragement gave me the confidence I needed to keep pushing myself and striving for improvement. Looking ahead, I know there is still more to learn and more challenges to overcome. Learning a language is a lifelong journey, and I'm excited to continue improving my English skills. I want to learn more about English literature, watch movies in English without subtitles, and maybe even travel to English-speaking countries one day. To anyone else learning English or any new language, I want to say, be patient with yourself. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, and keep practicing every day. Learning a language is a rewarding experience that opens doors to new opportunities and friendships. Enjoy the journey and celebrate your progress along the way.